late again. I'm running late again, and I apologize again. I have no excuse except that I might be running late over the next few days just because, um, late lunches. If I'm being honest, I'm a nerd. I just started opening the Exit calendar, advent calendar, and I tend to not want to actually go back to work until I've got it figured out. But anyway, thank you for joining me for chapter 15 of Lud-in-the-Mist. Let's get started. Chapter 15. Ho, ho, ho. The clerk shut the great tome, bowed low, and withdrew to his place, and an ominous silence reigned in the hall. Master Nathaniel sat watching the scene with an eye so cold and aloof that the eye of the law itself could surely not have been colder. What power had delusion or legal fictions against the mysterious impetus propelling him along the strained white— What power had delusion or legal fictions against the mysterious impetus propelling him along the straight white road that led he knew not whither? But Master Ambrose sprang up and demanded fiercely that the honourable senator would oblige them by an explanation of his offensive insinuations. Nothing loth. Is that supposed to be loath? Sometimes this old dialogue really gets me. It's not dialogue, I know. These old words really get me. Yeah, it's spelled differently. Nothing loath, Master Polydore again rose to his feet and, pointing a menacing finger at Master Nathaniel, he said, "His worship the mayor has told us of a man stealthy, mocking, and subtle, who has brought this recent grief and shame upon us. That man is none other than his worship the mayor himself." Master Ambrose again sprung to his feet and began angrily to protest, but Master Nathaniel, ex cathedra, sternly ordered him to be silent and to sit down. Master Polydore continued, "He has been dumb when it was the time to speak, feeble when it was the time to act, treacherous as the desolate homes of his friends can testify, and given to vanities. Aye, given to vanities for what?" And he smiled ironically. "But vanity in a man is too great a love for grow-gains and tuftetity. But vanity in a man is too great a love for grow-grains and tuftifitties and other costly silks. Therefore I move that in the eye of the law he be accounted dead." A low murmur of approval surged over the hall. "Will he deny that he is over-fond of silk?" Master Nathaniel bowed in token that he did deny it. Master Polydore asked if he would then be willing to save— Master Polydore asked if he would then be willing to have his house searched. Again Master Nathaniel bowed. There and then? And Master Nathaniel bowed again. So the Senate rose, and 20 of the senators, without removing their robes, filed out of the guild hall and marched 2 and 2 towards Master Nathaniel's house. On the way, who should tag himself on to the procession but Endymion Lear? At this, Master Ambrose completely lost his temper. He would like to know why this double-dyed villain, this shameless son of a fairy, was putting his rancid nose into the private concerns of the Senate. But Master Nathaniel cried impatiently, "Oh, let him come, Ambrose, if he wants to. The more the merrier." You can picture the consternation of Dame Marigold when, a few minutes later, her brother, with a crowd of senators pressing up behind him, bade her, with a face of grave compassion, to bring him all the keys of the house. They proceeded to make a thorough search, ransacking every cupboard, chest, and bureau. But nowhere did they find so much as an incriminating pip so much as a stain of dubious colour. "Well," began Master Polydore in a voice of mingled relief and disappointment, "it seems that our search has been a fruitless one, eh?" prompted Endymion Lear, rubbing his hands and darting his bright eyes over the assembled faces. "Well, perhaps it has. Perhaps it has." They were standing in the hall, quite close to the grandfather's clock, which was ticking away as innocent and foolish-looking as a newly born lamb. Endymion Lear walked up to it and gazed at it quizzically, with his head on one side. Then he tapped its mahogany case, making Dame Marigold think of what the guardian at the guild hall had said of his likeness to a woodpecker. Then he stood back a few paces and wagged his attention at it in comic admonition. "Vulgar buffoon," said Master Ambrose quite audibly. And then the wag turned to Master Polydore and said, "Just before we go, to make quite sure, what about having a peep inside this clock?" Sorry, I was narrating for 4 minutes without a drink. All right, I just needed to wet my whistle, so to speak. Master Polydore had secretly sympathized with Master Ambrose's ejaculation and thought that the doctor, by jesting at such a time, was showing a deplorable lack of good breeding. All the same, the law does not shrink from reducing thoroughness to absurdity, so he asked Master Nathaniel if he would kindly produce the key of the clock. He did so, and the case was opened. It's so weird. My teleprompt's just not working. Dame Marigold made a grimace and held her pomander to her nose, and to the general amazement, that foolish, innocent-looking grandfather's clock stood revealed as a veritable cornucopia of exotic, strangely coloured, sinister-looking fruits. Vine-like tendrils, studded with bright, menacing berries, were twined round the pendulum and the chains of the two leaden weights, and at the bottom of the case stood a gourd of an unknown colour, which had been scooped hollow and filled with what looked like crimson grapes, tawny figs, raspberries of an emerald green, and fruits even stranger than these, and of colour and shape not found in any of the species of Dorimare. A murmur of horror and surprise arose from the assembled company, and was it from the clock, or down the chimney, or from the ivy peeping in at the window, from somewhere quite close came the mocking sound of ho, ho, ho. Of course, before many hours were over, the whole of Lud-in-the-Mist was laughing at the anticlimax to the mayor's highfalutin speech that morning in the Senate, and in the evening he was burned in effigy by the mob, and among those who danced round the bonfire were Bawdy Bess and Mother Tibbs, though it was doubtful whether Mother Tibbs really understood what was happening. It was an excuse for dancing, and that was enough for her. It was reported, too, that the yeomanry and their captain, though not actually taking part in these demonstrations, stood looking on with indulgent smiles. Among the respectable tradesmen in the far from unsympathetic crowd of spectators was Ebenezer Prim, the clockmaker. He had, however, not allowed his two daughters to be there, and they were sitting dully at home, keeping the supper hot for their father and the black-wigged apprentice. But Ebenezer came back without him, and Rosie and Lettuce were too much in awe of their father to ask any questions. The evening dragged wearily on. Ebenezer sat reading The Good Mayor's Walk through Lud-in-the-Mist. Again, I'm not usually going so long without making a mistake. A didactic and unspeakably dreary poem, dating from the early days of the Republic, and from time to time he would glance severely over the tops of his spectacles at his daughters, who were whispering over their tatting and looking frequently towards the door. But when they finally went upstairs to bed, the apprentice had not yet come in, and in the privacy of their bedroom, the girls admitted to each other that it was the dullest evening they had spent since his arrival early in spring. For it was wonderful what high spirits were concealed behind that young man's prim exterior. Why, it was sufficient to enliven even an evening spent in the society of Papa to watch the comical grimaces he pulled behind that gentleman's respectable back. And it was delicious when the shrill "ho, ho, ho" would suddenly escape him, and he would instantly snap down on the top of it his most sanctimonious expression. And then he seemed to possess an inexhaustible store of riddles and funny songs, and there was really no end to the intervention. I don't think the word was intervention. And there was really no end to the invention and variety of his practical jokes. The Misses Prim, since their earliest childhood, had craved for a monkey or a cockatoo, such as sailor brothers or cousins brought to their friends. Their father, however, had always sternly refused to have any such creature in his house. But the new apprentice had been 10 times more amusing than any monkey or cockatoo that had ever come from the Cinnamon Isles. The next morning, as he did not come for his usual early roll and glass of homemade cordial, the two girls peeped into his room and found that his bed had not been slept in, and lying neglected on the floor was the neat black wig. Nor did he ever come back to claim it. And when they timidly asked their father what had happened to him, he sternly forbade them ever again to mention his name, adding, with a mysterious shake of the head, "For some time I have had my suspicions that he was not what he appeared." And then he sighed regretfully and murmured, "But never before have I had an apprentice with such wonderfully skilful fingers." As for Master Nathaniel, while he was being burned in effigy in the marketplace, he was sitting comfortably in his pipe room, deep in an infolio. He had suddenly remembered that it was something in the Widow Gibbety's trial that was connected in his mind with Master Ambrose's joke about the dead bleeding, and he was rereading that trial, this time with absorption. As he read, the colours of his mental landscape were gradually modified, as the colours of a real landscape are modified according to the position of the sun. But if a white road cuts through the landscape, it still gleams white, even when the moon has taken the place of the sun, and a straight road still gleamed white across the landscape of Master Nathaniel's. And a straight road still gleamed white across the landscape of Master Nathaniel's mind. All right, that is chapter 15. So, bum, bum, bum. So as it turns out, the clockmaker's apprentice was not for real. He was in fact a character that we've already seen before, earlier in the book. But that's all I'm going to say about that. I don't want to spoil it too much. Bear with me 1 minute while I just create a new file for chapter 16, and then we can move on. I'm really enjoying this book, though. Okay. Chapter 16. The Widow Gibbety's Smile. The Widow Gibbety's Trial. The following day, with all the masquerading that the law delights in, Master Nathaniel was pronounced in the Senate to be dead. His robes of office were taken off him, and they were donned by Master Polydore Vigil, the new mayor. As for Master Nathaniel, well, he was wrapped in a... That's just weirdly worded. As for Master Nathaniel, was wrapped in a shroud, laid on a bier, and carried to his home by 4 of the senators, the populace lining the streets and greeting the mock obsequies. Obsequies? I know obsequious, but obsequies is kind of a weird one for me. Excuse me. Realize my do not disturb is on. Wasn't on. Now it is. Okay. The populace lining the streets and greeting the mob. Mob? The populace lining the streets and greeting the mop. Mop? Why do I keep saying mop? The populace lining the streets and greeting the mock obsequies. Mock obsequies. The populace lining the streets and greeting the mock obsequies with catcalls and shouts of triumph. But the ceremony over, when Master Ambrose, boiling with indignation at the outrage, came to visit his friend, he found a very cheerful corpse who greeted him with a smack on the back and a cry of, "Never say die. Never say die, Brosy. I've something here that should interest you." And he thrust into his hand an open in-folio. "What's this?" asked the bewildered Master Ambrose. There was a certain solemnity in Master Nathaniel's voice as he replied, "It's the law, Ambrose. The homeopathic antidote that our forefathers discovered." Excuse me. I knew I was just going to lose that sentence. The homeopathic antidote that our forefathers discovered to delusion. Oh, I like that line. The homeopathic antidote that our forefathers discovered to delusion. Sit down this very minute and read that trial through. As Master Ambrose knew well, it was useless trying to talk to Nat about one thing when his mind was filled with another. Besides, his curiosity was aroused, for he had come to realize that Nat's butterfly whims were sometimes the disguise of shrewd and useful intuitions. So, through force of long habit, growling out a protest about this being no time for tomfoolery and rubbish, he settled down to read the volume at the place where Master Nathaniel had opened it, namely, at the account of the trial of the widow Gibbety for the murder of her husband. The plaintiff, as we have seen, was a labourer, Diggory Carp by name, who had been in the employ of the late farmer. He said he had been suddenly dismissed by the defendant just after harvest, when it was not easy to find another job. No reason was given for his dismissal, so Diggory went to the farmer himself, who, he said, had always been a kind and just master, to beg that he might be kept on. The farmer practically admitted that there was no reason for his dismissal. Except that the mistress had taken a dislike to him. "Women are kittle-cattle, Diggory," he had said with an apologetic laugh, "and it's best humouring them, though it's hard on the folks they get their knife into, so I fear it will be best for everyone concerned that you should leave my service, Diggory." But he gave him a handful of florins over and above his wages, and told him he might take a sack of lentils from the granary, if he were careful that the mistress did not get wind of it. Now, Diggory had a shrewd suspicion as to why the defendant wanted to get rid of him. Though she was little more than a girl, she was the farmer's second wife and more like his daughter's elder sister than her stepdame. She had the reputation of being as staid and sensible as a woman of 40, but Diggory knew better. He had discovered that she had a lover. One evening he had come on her in the orchard, lying in the arms of a young foreigner called Christopher Pugwalker, a herbalist who had first appeared in the neighbourhood just before the great drought. And from that time on, said Diggory, she'd got her knives. Knives? Knives or knife? It should be knife. Hold on. Lost my place. She'd got her knife into me, and everything I did was wrong, and I believe she hadn't a moment's peace till she'd got rid of me. Though, if she'd only known I was no blab and not one for blaming young... Though if she'd only known I was no blab, and not one for blaming young blood and a wife half the age of her husband. So he and his wife and his children were turned out on the world. The first night they camped out in a field, and when they had lighted a fire, Diggory opened the sack that, with the farmer's permission, he had taken from the granary, in order that his wife might make them some lentil soup for supper. But lo and behold, instead of lentils, the sack contained fruit. Fruit that Diggory Carp, as a West Countryman, born and bred near the elfin marches, recognized at the first glance to be of a kind that he would not dream of touching himself, or allowing his wife and children to touch. The sack, in fact, contained fairy fruit. So they buried it in the field, for as Diggory said, though the stuff be poison for men, they do say as how it's a mighty fine manure for the crops. For a week or so they tramped the country, living from hand to mouth. Sometimes Diggory would earn a little by doing odd jobs for the farmers, or by playing the fiddle at village... Or by playing the fiddle at the... Or by... Okay. My app did not want to wait for me to get the line out properly. Or by playing the fiddle at village weddings, for Diggory, it would seem, was a noted fiddler. But with the coming of winter they began to feel the pinch of poverty, and his wife bethought her of the trade of basket-making she had learned in her youth. And, as they were camping at the time at the place where grew the best osiers for the purpose, she determined to see if her fingers had retained their old cunning. As the sap of these particular osiers was a deadly poison, she would not allow the children to help her to gather them. So she set to, and made wicker urns in which the farmers' wives could keep their grain in winter, and baskets of fancy shapes for lads to give to their sweethearts, to hold their ribbons and fallals. The children peddled them about the countryside, and thus they managed to keep the pot boiling. The following summer, shortly before harvest, Diggory's eldest girl went to try and sell some baskets in the village of Swan. There she met the defendant, whom she asked to look at her wares, relying on not being recognized as a daughter of Diggory's. Through having been in service at another farm when her father was working at the Gibbeties. The defendant seemed pleased with the baskets, bought 2 or 3, and got into talk with the girl about the basket-making industry, in the course of which she learned that the best osiers for the purpose were very poisonous. Finally, she asked the girl to bring her a bundle of the osiers in question, as making baskets, she said, would make a pleasant variety of an evening from the eternal spinning, and in the course of a few days the girl brought her, as requested, a bundle of the osiers, and was well paid for them. Not long afterwards came the news that the farmer Gibbety had died suddenly in the night, and with it wafted the rumour of foul play. There was an old custom in that part of the country that whenever there was a death in the house, all the inmates should march in procession past the corpse. It was really a sort of primitive inquest, for it was believed that in the case of foul play, the corpse would bleed at the nose as the murderer passed. This custom, said Diggory, was universally observed in that part of the country, even in cases as free from all. I messed that up. Clearly. Even in cases as free from all suspicion as those of women dying in childbed. Oh, hang on a sec. Even in cases as free from all suspicion as those of women dying in childbed. And in all the taverns and farmhouses of the neighbourhood, it was being whispered that the corpse of the farmer Gibbety, on the defendants walking past it, had bled copiously, and when Christopher Pugwalker's turn had come to pass it, it had bled a second time. And knowing what he did, Diggory Carp came to feel that it was his duty to lodge an accusation against the widow. His two reasons, then, for thinking her guilty were that the corpse had bled when she passed it, and that she had bought from his daughter osiers, the sap of which was poisonous. The motive for the crime he found in her having a young lover whom she wished should stand in her dead husband's shoes. It was useless for the defendant to deny that Pugwalker was her lover. The fact had for months been the scandal of the neighbourhood, and she had finally lost all sense of shame, and had actually had him to lodge in the farm for several months before her husband's death. This was proved beyond a shadow of a doubt by the witnesses summoned by Diggory. As for the bleeding of the corpse, vulgar superstitions did not fall within the cognizance of the law, and the widow ignored it in her defence. However, with regard to that other vulgar superstition to which the plaintiff had alluded, fairy fruit, she admitted in passing that very much against her wishes, her late husband had sometimes used it as manure, though she had never discovered how he procured it. As to the osiers, she allowed that she had bought a bundle from the plaintiff's daughter, but that it was for no sinister purpose she was able conclusively to prove. For she summoned various witnesses, among others the midwife from the village, who was always called in. Okay. Who was always called in cases of sickness, who had been present during the last hours of the farmer, and who all of them swore that his death had been a painless one. And various physicians who were summoned as expert witnesses all maintained that the victim of the poisonous sap of osiers always died in agony. Then she turned the tables on the plaintiff. Ah, this thing keeps jumping around today. She proved that Diggory's dismissal had been neither sudden nor unjust, for, owing to his thieving propensities, he had often been threatened with it by her late husband, and several of the farm servants testified to the truth of her words. As to the handful of florins and the sack of lentils, all she could say was that it was not like the farmer to load a dishonest servant with presents. But nothing had been said about 2 sacks of corn, a pig, and a valuable hen and her brood, which had disappeared simultaneously with the departure of the plaintiff. Her husband, she said, had been very angry about it, and had wanted to have Diggory pursued and clapped into jail, but she had persuaded him to be merciful. The long and the short of it was that the widow left the court without a stain on her character, and that a 10 years' sentence for theft was passed on Diggory. As for Christopher Pugwalker, he had disappeared shortly before the trial, and the widow denied all knowledge of his whereabouts. All right, that is the end of chapter 16. And I'm going to keep going here and move on to chapter 17. So, if you're coming at this wondering where the first few chapters in this book are, it's not ever going to be on YouTube, simply because it was on the Clock app that I was working on it. But I don't love the algorithm, and I've just had some recent run-ins with the Clock app recently, plus political stuff. So here I am on YouTube. So I apologize, but the full audiobook will be coming out probably in February. It really depends on when I get done with this recording, and then it has to go to my editor, and of course we have the holidays. So, but probably February timeframe. And I will include links for the audiobook when it does actually come out. Chapter 17. The World in Law. "Well," said Master Ambrose as he laid down the volume, "the woman was clearly as innocent as you are, and I should very much like to know what bearing the case has upon the present crisis." Master Nathaniel drew up his chair close to his friend's and said in a low voice, as if he feared an invisible listener, "Ambrose, do you remember how you startled Leah with your question as to whether the dead could bleed?" "I'm not likely to forget it," said Master Ambrose with an angry laugh. That was all explained the night before last in the fields of Gramarye." Yes, but supposing he had been thinking of something else, not of fairy fruit. What if Endymion Lear and Christopher Pugwalker were one and the same? "Well, I don't see the slightest reason for thinking so, but even if they were, what good would it do us? Because I have an instinct that hidden in that old case is a good, honest hempen rope, too strong for all the gossamer threads of fairy." "You mean that we can get the rascal hanged? By the harvest of souls! Oh, you're an optimist, Nat. If ever a fellow died in his bed from natural causes, it was that fellow Gibbety. But for all that, there's no reason to lie down under the outrageous practical joke that was played off on you yesterday. By my great excuse me, by my great aunt's rump." That's brilliant. "By my great aunt's rump, I thought Polydore and the rest of them had more sense than to be taken in by such tomfoolery. But the truth of it is that that villain Lear can make them believe what he chooses." "Exactly," cried Master Nathaniel eagerly. The original mere The original meaning of fairy is supposed to be delusion. They can juggle with appearances, We have seen them at it in that tapestry room. How are we to make any stand against an enemy with such powers behind them? With such powers behind him? You don't mean that you are going to lie down under it, Nat? Cried Master Ambrose indignantly. Not ultimately, but for a time I must be like the mole and work in secret. And now I want you to listen to me, Ambrose, and not scold me for what you call wandering from the point and being prosy. Will you listen to me? Well, yes, if you've got anything sensible to say, said Master Ambrose grudgingly. Here goes then. What do you suppose the law was invented for, Ambrose? What was the law invented for? What are you driving at, Nat? I suppose it was invented to okay, I need to look up this pronunciation anyway. All right. I suppose it was invented to prevent rapine and robbery and murder and all that sort of thing. But you remember what my father said about the law being man's substitute for fairy fruit. Fairy things are all of them supposed to be shadowy cheats, delusion. But man can't live without delusion, so he creates for himself another form of delusion, the world in law, subject to no other law but the will of man, where man juggles with facts to his heart's content and says, if I choose, I shall make a man old enough to be my father, my son. And if I choose, I shall turn fruit into silk, and black into white, for this is the world I have made myself, and here I am master. And he creates a monster to inhabit it, the man in law, who is like a mechanical toy and always behaves exactly as he is expected to behave, and is no more like you and me than our fair and is no more like you and me than are the fairies. For the life of him, Master Ambrose could not suppress a grunt of impatience. But he was a man of his word, so he refrained from further interruption. Beyond the borders of the world in law, continued Master Nathaniel, that is to say, the world as we choose for our convenience that it should appear, there is delusion, or reality, and the people who live there are as safe from our clutches as if they lived on another planet. No, Ambrose, you needn't purse up your lips like that. Everything I've been saying is to be found more or less in my father's writings, and nobody ever thought him fantastic. Probably because they never took the trouble to read his books. I must confess I never did myself till just the other day. As he spoke, he glanced up at the portrait of the late Master Josiah, taken in the very armchair he, Nathaniel. Not a mistake per se, but I feel like the emphasis was a bit wrong there. Taken in the very armchair he, Nathaniel, was at that very moment sitting in, and following his son's every movement with a sly, legal smile. No, there had certainly been nothing fantastic about Master Josiah. And yet, there was something not altogether human about these bright, bird-like eyes, and that very pointed chin. Had Master Josiah also heard the note, and fled from it to the world in law? Then he went on, but what I'm going to say now is my own idea. Supposing that everything that happens on the one planet, the planet that we call delusion, reacts on the other planet, that is to say, the world as we choose to see it, the world in law. No, no, Ambrose, you promised to hear me out, for it was clear that Master Ambrose was getting restive. Supposing, then, that one planet reacts on the other, but that these reactions are translated as it were into the terms of the other. To take an example, supposing that what on one planet is a spiritual sin should turn on the other into a felony, that what in the world of delusion are hands stained with fairy fruit should, in the world in law, turn into hands stained with human blood. In short, that Endymion Lear should turn into Christopher Pugwalker. Master Ambrose's impatience had changed to real alarm. He greatly feared that Master Nathaniel's brain had been unhinged by his recent misfortunes. Master Nathaniel burst out laughing. "I believe you think I've gone off my head, Brosie, but I've not, I promise you. In plain language, unless we can find that this fellow, Lear, has been guilty of something in the eye of the law, he'll go on triumphing over us, and laughing at us in his sleeve, and ruining our country for our children, till finally all the Senate except you and me follows his funeral procession with weeping and wailing to the fields of Gramarye. It's our one hope of getting even with him, Brosie. Otherwise we might as soon hope to catch a dream and put it in a cage." "Well, according to your ideas of the law, Nat, it shouldn't be too difficult," said Master Ambrose dryly. "You seem to consider that in what you call the world in law, one does as one likes with facts. Launch a new legal fiction, then, according to which, for your own particular convenience, Endymion Lear is for the future Christopher Pugwalker." Master Nathaniel laughed. "I'm not that fake. That laugh was so fake. Uh, okay. "I'm in hopes we can prove it without legal fiction," he said. "The widow Gibbety's trial took place 36 years ago, 4 years after the great drought, when, as Marigold has discovered, Lear was in Dorimare, though he has always given us to understand that he did not arrive till considerably later, and the reason would be obvious if he left as Pugwalker and returned as Lear. Also, we know that he is intimate with the widow Gibbety. Pugwalker was a herbalist. So is Lear. And then there is the fright you gave him with your question. Do the dead bleed? Nothing will make me believe that the question immediately suggested to him the mock funeral. Nothing will make me believe that the question immediately suggested to him the mock funeral and the coffin with fairy fruit. He might think of that on second thoughts, not right away. Oh no. I hope to be able to convince you, and before very long, that I am right in this matter, as I was in the other. It's our one hope. I hope to be able to convince you, and before very long, that I hope to be able to convince you, and before very long, that I am right in this matter as I was in the other. It's our one hope, Ambrose. "Well, Nat," said Master Ambrose, "though you talk more nonsense in half an hour than most people do in a lifetime, I've been coming to the conclusion that you're not such a fool as you look. And after all, got a little scratchy there." Okay. "And after all, in Hempy's old story, it was the village idiot who put salt on the dragon's tail." Master Nathaniel laughed, quite pleased by this equivocal compliment. It was so rarely that Ambrose paid one a compliment at all. "Well," continued Master Ambrose, "and how are you going to set about launching your legal fiction, eh? Oh, I'll try and get in touch with some of the witnesses in the trial. Diggory Carp himself may turn out to be still alive. At any rate, it will give me something to do, and Lud's no place for me just now." Master Ambrose groaned. Has it really come to this, Nat, that you have to leave Lud, and that we could do nothing against this, this cobweb of lies and buffoonery and, well, delusion, if you like? I can tell you I haven't spared Polydore and the rest of them the rough side of my tongue, but it's as if that fellow Lear had cast a spell on them. But we'll break the spell. By the golden apples of the west we'll break it, Ambrose, cried Master Nathaniel buoyantly. We'll dredge the shadows with the net of the law, and Lear shall end on the gallows. Or my name's not Chanticleer. Sorry, there was a noise in that word. So I know it's going to get sent back to me for correction. So I'm just going to fix it now. Or my name's not Chanticleer. Well, said Master Ambrose, seeing you've got this bee in your bonnet about Lear, you might like a little souvenir of him. It's the embroidered slipper I took from that gibbering criminal old woman's parlour, and now that her affair is settled, there's no more use for it. The variety of silk found in the academy had finally been decided to be part Barantine tuftity, Barantine tuftifity, and part figured mohair, and Miss Primrose had been heavily fined and set at liberty. I told you how the sight of it made him jump, and though the reason is obvious enough, he thought it was fairy fruit. It seems to take so little to set your brain romancing, there's no telling what you mayn't discover from it. I'll have it sent over to you. You're very kind, Ambrose. I'm sure it will be most valuable, said Master Nathaniel ironically. During Miss Primrose's trial, the slipper had from time to time been handed round During Miss Primrose's trial, the slipper had from time to time been handed round among the judges without its helping them in the slightest in the delicate distinctions they were drawing between tough to fitty During Miss Primrose's trial, the slipper had from time to time been handed round among the judges, without its helping them in the slightest in the delicate distinctions they were drawing between tuftifity and mohair. In Master Nathaniel it had aroused a vague sense of boredom and embarrassment. For it suggested a long series of birthday presents from Prunella that had put him to the inconvenience of pumping up adequate expressions of gratitude and admiration. He had little hope of being able to extricate any useful information from that slipper. Still, Ambrose must have his joke. They sat in silence for a few minutes, and then Master Nathaniel rose to his feet and said, This may be a long business, Ambrose, and we may not have an opportunity for another talk. Shall we pledge each other in wild thyme gin? I'm not the man to refuse your wild thyme gin, Nat, and you don't often give one a chance of tasting it, you old miser, said Master Ambrose, trying to mask his emotion with facetiousness. When he had been given a glass filled with the perfumed grass-green syrup, he raised it and, smiling at Master Nathaniel, began. Well, Nat, stop a minute. Stop a minute, Ambrose, interrupted Master Nathaniel. I've got a silly, sudden whim. I've got a... I've got a sudden silly whim that we should take an oath. I've got a sudden silly whim that should take an oath I must have read when I was a youngster in some old book. The words have suddenly come back to me. They go like this. We, and then we say our own names, Nathaniel Chanticleer and Ambrose Honeysuckle, swear by the living and the dead. By the past and the future, by memories and hopes, that if a vision comes begging at our door, we will take it in and warm it at our hearth, and that we will not be wiser than the foolish, nor more cunning than the simple, and that we will remember that he who rides the wind needs must go where his steed carries him. Say it after me, Ambrose. By the white ladies of the fields. Never in my life. By the white ladies of the fields, never in my life have I heard such fustian, grumbled Master Ambrose. But Nat seemed to have set his heart on this absurd ceremony, and Master Ambrose felt that the least he could do was to humour him. For who could say what the future held in store, and when they might meet again? So, in a protesting and excessively matter-of-fact voice, he repeated after him the words of the oath. When and in what book had Master Nathaniel found it? For it was the vow taken by the candidates for initiation into the first degree of the ancient mysteries of Dorimare. Do not forget that, in the eye of the law, Master Nathaniel was a dead man. All right. That is the end of my narrating Lud-in-the-Mist today. All right. So I will be back here tomorrow. What time? Probably 9:30 Pacific time. So if anybody's around, please do join me and we will find out what Nat is up to now that he's no longer mayor. Bye for now.